When we talk about war, our minds often drift to the front lines, soldiers in uniform, and tanks rumbling through cities with guns blazing. We think of adults, seasoned, trained, and maybe even hardened by ideology. But there's something we often overlook, or maybe something we choose not to see. Children. Not as innocent bystanders, not as the ones waiting at home, but as soldiers. It's a thought that's hard to sit with. A child with a weapon. A child taking orders. A child learning to kill. And while the idea might seem shocking today, history tells us that this practice stretches back thousands of years. One of the earliest and perhaps most haunting examples takes us back to a place many of us know from history books: Sparta. We often glorify it in films and pop culture as strong warriors, fearless fighters, and a society built on discipline and power. But in Sparta, the war didn't begin on the battlefield. It began in childhood. Boys were taken from their homes at the tender age of 7. Not because they misbehaved, not because they were ready, but because the state decided it was time. The place where this happened was called the agoge, a harsh, state-run military training program. But training is a gentle word. What these boys endured was nothing short of brutal. They were taught to hunt like predators, to survive with scarce food, and to fight through pain and exhaustion. They were beaten, starved, and humiliated, not for punishment, but as practice. The goal was to break the child and build the warrior. And while Sparta might be the most famous example, it is not an isolated story. The truth is, wherever there has been a war, there have been children used to fight it. It forces us to ask, what kind of world takes a child and teaches them to hate, to harm, to survive, instead of dream? What do we lose, and what does humanity lose when a child becomes a soldier?
Welcome to Unveiled History.
It was 1967, the height of the Vietnam War, and a mother of 4 sat in her studio, heart heavy with fear. Her eldest son was nearing draft age. Her name was Lorraine Schneider, an artist, yes, but also a mother terrified of losing her child to war. So she did what she knew how to do. She made a simple image, a delicate, crooked flower. Beneath it, just 10 words. War is not healthy for children and other living things. That poster spread like wildfire. It became a symbol, a protest. The mother's plea turned into a movement. But even as the world rallied around those words, children were still marching, not in protest, but into war. Over 2 decades later, in 1989, the world tried to make it official. The Convention on the Rights of the Child sought to protect children from being used in conflict. To say once and for all that 18 is the line. No one under should be carrying a gun, let alone dying from one. But even then, powerful nations, including the United States and Britain, resisted. Because to them, war was the strategy, and children sometimes were just the most available soldiers. But as we mentioned earlier, this didn't start in the 20th century. This goes way back. Far, far back. In ancient times, children were aides, charioteers, and armour bearers. The Mediterranean world was full of these young attendants. You can even find them in the Bible. David, before slaving Goliath, served as a musician and arms bearer to King Saul. In ancient Egypt, in Hittite carvings, in Greek mythology, young boys appear again and again, standing just behind the heroes we celebrate. Hylas, the beloved companion of Hercules, was said to accompany him on his adventures. Philosophers wrote of them and painters captured them. Everyone knew it was unwise and cruel to use children in war, and yes, rules supposedly set the minimum age at 16. But as we often learn from history, rules are one thing and reality is another. We have names. Quintus Postumius Solus enlisted at just 14 years old and went on to serve 21 years in Legio XX Valeria Victrix. Caecilius Donatus gave 26 years to the Roman army, only to die just before his discharge. Centuries later, in 1814, as Napoleon's empire crumbled, desperation set in. The emperor needed troops, anyone who could hold a musket. So he conscripted teenagers, many of them orphans. They were called Marie-Louise after Empress Marie-Louise of France, and they were just 14 to 17 years old. Some were given uniforms, others were handed drums. Today, we call them drummer boys. Even in America's Civil War, boys as young as 8 served in both the Union and Confederate armies, not just as drummers or buglers, but sometimes right on the battlefield. It's estimated that up to 10% of the Union Army was under 18. John Clem, just 11, became a national hero. The drummer boy of Chickamauga, after reportedly shooting a Confederate soldier, Edward Black, only 8 years old, marched with his drum into war, and Charles Edwin King, 12, would never return home, killed in combat while still a child. On the sea, the story was no different. During the Age of Sail, the mighty ships of the British Royal Navy relied on small, swift hands. Boys, some as young as 10, ran through smoke and chaos, delivering powder and shots to the cannons. They were called powder monkeys. But the seas weren't the only place where childhood was swallowed by war. In World War I, we meet one of the most heartbreaking stories in military history. Momcilo Gavric. In August 1914, when he was just 8 years old, Austro-Hungarian soldiers killed his parents, grandmother, and 7 siblings in his village. Left with nothing, he joined the 6th Artillery Division of the Serbian army. 8 years old, alone, in uniform, and on the battlefield. He became the youngest known soldier of the entire war, and he wasn't alone. Across Europe, boys as young as 12 were caught up in the wave of nationalism and pride. Some lied about their ages, desperate to escape poverty or chase glory. George Thomas Paget, for example, was only 17 when he joined a Bantam battalion in the Welsh Regiment, passing himself off as a man. In the brutal Gallipoli campaign, or as it's called in Turkey, Çanakkale, an entire unit known as the 15 Aylar, the 15s, was made up of boys aged 15 and younger. 120 children went into the trenches. None came back. In World War II, history repeated itself, only more widespread and more organised. The youngest American to enlist was Calvin Graham. He was just 12 years old when he joined the US Navy, lying about his age. In Russia, Sergei Andreevich Aleshkov, born in 1936, was only 6 years old when Nazi soldiers killed his family during a raid. Rescued by Soviet troops, he was adopted into their unit and became known as a son of the regiment. Too small to hold a rifle and too young to understand war, he marched with them, slept beside them, and laughed with them. And this wasn't rare. Children on all sides of the war were trained, indoctrinated, and pushed to the front lines. They were made to believe they were soldiers when all they wanted was to be children. Unfortunately, modern warfare hasn't ended the tragedy of child soldiers, it's only evolved it. In the chaos of Iraq, while adults fought for power and ideology, children were pulled into battles they barely understood. The US military detained over 100 Iraqi juveniles, many labelled as high-risk threats. Some were held in Abu Ghraib prison. Meanwhile, British forces captured dozens more boys. In Afghanistan, this was no different. The very first US soldier killed in the War on Terror was killed by a 14-year-old sniper. Captured boys, some as young as 13, were taken to Guantanamo Bay. There, they were placed in a secluded section called Camp Iguana. It was a waiting room for a decision: prosecute them as terrorists or try to save what was left of their childhood. In the 1990s, Saddam Hussein built an entire system to militarize children. He called them the Ashbal Saddam, Saddam's lion cubs. Boys as young as 10 trained to fight, to kill, to die. And when the invasion came, child soldiers fought in cities like Nasiriyah, Mosul, and Karbala. Some were used as human shields, others as foot soldiers. But none had a choice. But this isn't just Iraq or Afghanistan. Africa's history is scarred with the same wounds. During the Cold War, communist-backed regimes militarized children in Ethiopia and Angola. And in Nigeria's civil war, children were fighting for Biafra, even spying behind enemy lines. But it wasn't until the 1990s and early 2000s that the world finally began to pay attention. Not because the practice was new, but because the world finally started to care. Pictures from Sierra Leone, Liberia, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo shocked the world. Little boys in oversized boots, holding AK-47s. It was during this time that the child soldier crisis entered global cultures through memoirs. Like Ishmael Beer's A Long Way Gone, films like Beasts of No Nation, and global campaigns like Coney 2012. In 1998, the International Criminal Court declared the recruitment of children under 15 a war crime. But despite the outrage, the numbers kept growing. Today, there are over 300,000 children actively serving as fighters. The average age is just over 12. Girls are not left out. 1 in every 3 armed groups that use children includes girls. Underage girls have fought in over 55 countries. Children now serve in 40% of the world's armed forces, and militant groups have been involved in nearly 75% of all conflicts worldwide. The question is, why children? Because with children in the ranks, warlords, rebel leaders, and terrorist groups find it easier to start wars and harder to end them. Children are cheap, obedient, easily manipulated, and disposable. And so the cycle continues. If you really enjoyed this video, do not forget to press the like button and subscribe to this channel to not miss out on more historical stories like this.